One of the worst mistakes I made climbing to Radiant is not understanding how defaults work and not knowing when to rotate around the map to help my teammates. So in the second part of our Ultimate Map Control Series guide, I will be focusing on how players can give up or yield the zone, especially around the opening and intermediate zones for successful defaults and rotations. The literal definition of the word default means a selection made usually automatically or without active consideration due to lack of a viable alternative. During the planning stage of the round, or stage 0 as I like to call it, teams can choose a default setup at the start of the round if there isn't a best play that they can come up with. The primary objective of a default is not to get a pick, but to gain info first and to bait out important utility that can obliterate your team's push onto site. Once your team agrees to play a default setup and the round starts, you've officially entered stage 1 of the round. During stage 1, teams are fighting for the opening zones of the map and getting info about the enemy team. You'll often see teams on both sides using recons or cams, sky flashes, KO knife, etc. to get info. It's like how doctors will take your blood pressure, body temperature, and do further tests before giving a diagnosis. You don't want to do anything risky during defaults. Most of the time when you're defaulting, your team will be spread out across the map. You'll often be put in situations where you're the only person watching an opening zone of the map to establish early round map control. This means that if you die while trying to get a pick or info, then no one will be there to trade you out. By dying alone, your team loses out on your utility for the round, the map control on your side of the map, and the round can quickly fall apart from there. So when you default, I'm not saying give up the opening zones right away or don't try to get picks at all. Picks are just a cherry on top, but the main goal is info. So use some jump peaks, use some rechargeable info abilities, but when the enemies try to contest you at all, make sure to prioritize your safety so you can stay alive to make a play with your teammates during stage 2 of the round, where your team actually decides whether to group up and push, split push, rotate over to the other side, throw a fake, etc. And real quick, if you don't know me, my name is Konpeki and I'm a Radiant coach, but I'm mainly known for running Valorant's #1 live coaching program called the Immortal roadmap program. Inside, we specialize in helping players rank up 5 divisions in just 6 weeks or less. At the time of recording this, we sold out all 30 spots for season 11 of our program, so we just opened up another 30 spots for season 12. I imagine these spots will sell out in the next 10 to 14 days, so if you want to get involved before those spots go and we shut things out until April, click the first link in the description below for a free training that we got for you as a teaser for the program. Otherwise, enjoy the video. The first scenario when defaults are useful is when the enemy team is on a save round. Oftentimes on save rounds, teams might try to stack a site and tread up trap plays, but you can easily avoid running into a stacked site if your team gathers info across the entire map and figure out where each agent is playing. The second scenario when defaults are useful is when the enemy defending side is playing aggressively towards the opening zones. If you notice that the enemy team is using a lot of utility at the start of the round, you can stand a bit further back to have enemies waste their utility and deny any information that they're trying to get. If the defenders end up pushing because they're greedy for info, your team will be ready to punish that. At the highest level of Valorant, it all comes down to finding the most cost-effective, low-risk method to gain and deny as much information against the enemy team. Lastly, the third scenario when defaults are useful is when your team's fast 4 to 5 man push failed. A common reason why fast pushes fail is because there was some kind of hard stopping utility that an enemy defender used to stall for time while the rest of the defenders rotated over to the site. On the attacking side default, the most common setup is a 1-3-1 setup or 2-1-2 setup, depending on if your team is leaning towards a split push. While defaulting, if you get info that an enemy player rotated off a site early, some of their dangerous abilities are on cooldown, or there's less dangerous weapons to deal with on the site, your team can lean towards that side of the map and execute the easier site together. On the defending side default, the most common setup is a 2-1-2 setup. If the enemies are dumping a lot of utility to blitz through the opening and intermediate zones, and you're just a single duelist who has very little stopping power, you probably want to give up the space and yield that zone so you can stay alive and help your teammates during the retake. If you manage to hide and stay alive backside, it can be an extremely strong position to help your teammates during the retake. Now that we've gone over defaults, let's talk about how giving up the zone applies to rotations. We mentioned that map control is how much space in the map your team or the enemy team controls based on the gathered information from your teammates' positioning, vision, and utility usage. That means there are 2 ways to lose space. Number 1, you either move away from the zone, or number 2, you stop getting info or vision of the area because you either looked away or you just died. And when we're in game, teammates are always moving around, holding random angles and dying left and right, leaving gaping holes in the map. If you're on the defender side and you notice there's a hole in the map, It is super important that the space gets patched up by a rotation from your team and or a piece of utility such as a smoke, molly, or slow. Additionally, for some reason in ranked, people just stop watching parts of the map that they should still be watching, which also leaves open gaps. So you can just tell them to keep holding the position for the team if you notice their vision cone drifting off to somewhere else. The simplest way to still cover as much ground as possible while rotating is having teammates shift one choke point over. So in a 2-1-2 setup, if one teammate dies towards the A bomb site on catwalk and your team isn't sure if it's a fast push, the defender watching mid should instantly start rotating towards cat to help the other A site player, while one defender on B shifts over towards mid. That way the defenders minimize the time that it takes to rotate and close the gap. In cases where enemies decide to capitalize on the opening really fast, you can even try to ult them as Sova or Brimstone, or use other hard stopping utility to stall for extra time as your teammates rotate over. If you don't patch up the hole quick enough, enemies can punish your team by taking all of site control and pushing beyond backside into your spawn. If you want to safely play retake and not get surprised by an enemy who's already pushed out towards your spawn, it's very important for you to catch any holes that need to be covered in the map and fix it as soon as you can. If you can't fix it, still pay attention to the minimap and at least be aware of how far enemies could have pushed up by the time you've rotated. My next video will be an in-depth guide on the third stage of the round, which involves post-plant scenarios, so make sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date with my content. Thanks for watching.